الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا وسيدنا وحبيبنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما يا رب العالمين. اللهم أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. First of all, I would like to say that looking out at everyone here, two things kind of jump out at me. Number one, the amount of young people that we have in the room makes me very, very happy, alhamdulillah, to see so many young people here. I'm going to get back to that point after my second thing, and that is that we find ourselves, or for me, this is rare to be in a place where the attendance of brothers is higher than the attendance of sisters. Which is kind of a bittersweet. It's always nice to see, mashallah, sisters coming out to the masjid and them attending courses and all that, especially the Maghrib seminars. If you ever attended a Maghrib seminar, there tends to be more sisters there than brothers. And I would say, mashallah, sisters are holding it down. I don't know what the brothers are doing, watching football or something like that. But today it's the opposite, alhamdulillah. So it's good, and it's also kind of sad that sisters didn't turn out as much as the brothers, but it's still nice to see the amount of brothers that are here. Back to my first point, the amount of young people that are here. I don't know if your parents forced you to be here. I don't know if you were given some other incentive, maybe something special for dinner tonight. I don't know. They haven't told me what's on the menu. In either case, it's very nice to see such young people, or to see this amount of young people in the masjid attending a lecture on Saturday night. You could be doing a whole number of other things. Like I said, I know football season has started, so I'm sure that's another. I'm sure there's a game going on tonight. I don't really watch sports or football, but I'm sure there's something going on tonight. And the reason why I say that, that is something which makes me feel good, is because one of the challenges that we're dealing with today as Muslims, and there's a temptation for me to say as Muslims in America or Muslims in the West, but actually, if you really look at this issue, it's a problem that we're having as Muslims around the world. And that is the younger generation of Muslims. We're finding a certain number, and I don't want to scare people, but we have more than before, I would say, young Muslims leaving Islam, or turning towards atheism, or dealing with doubts that they don't know how to answer, and that's causing them to separate themselves from Islam or Islamic knowledge, or even the masjid itself. And this is no surprise, not a shock. We understand this, we know what's going on. And the thing is, sometimes I know we feel ill-equipped to deal with that. And one of the issues is that the previous generation, I would say the generation before my generation, so for example, my parents, that generation, and this is me generalizing a little bit, but for that generation, Islam was almost just like part of your life, right? Especially if you grew up in a Muslim country. You didn't have a choice whether you want to practice Islam or not. You didn't have a choice whether you want to be Muslim or not. It's just part of who you are, right? Everyone around you is Muslim. Everyone around you fasts during the month of Ramadan. Everyone around you prays Darul. As I was saying, everyone around you is praying Tarawih, everyone around you is practicing Islam, and that spirituality was almost part of who you are. It was part of your identity, and that's why we find some people from that generation, some families even, Islam is just part of the culture. So whatever people would find in their culture, they just imagine that, or they perceive that to be Islam. Right? It's like, oh, my parents have been doing this, and this is how we've been practicing Islam, so this is what Islam is. But this generation right now, especially the immigrant generation, or the first generation, second generation immigrants, now what we're finding is, as Muslims living in a quote-unquote non-Muslim country, what we find is that we have access to so much, and so many different ideologies, and so many different ways of life, and religions, and thoughts, and ideas, and so on and so forth. So it's no longer the issue of Islam being part of your culture doesn't play that much of a factor as it did before. And so now, subhanAllah, we're as public speakers, as scholars, as du'at, one of the responsibilities that we have now, and I find myself in this situation as well, is that we have to now go back and look at the problem and say, what's happening? Right? Like, what's going on? Like, why is this generation losing their Islam? Like what's happening here? And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, but one of the things that kind of seems to be highlighted, for me at least, is that before, as I said, this whole issue of Islam being part of your culture. Every culture has practices and rituals and things that you do which is part of your culture. For example, if you think about weddings, right? Weddings is usually a time where culture usually comes out. If you think of like a typical Desi, Pakistani wedding or whatever, there's certain things that happen, right? There's certain things that are done, and those are rituals. You know, I'm not talking about Islam here, I'm talking about the Desi culture. There are rituals that are performed because it's part of the culture, and that's how it happens. Now, that's done, and people don't really question that, right? It's just part of your culture, so you do it. And those rituals are fine until your spirituality is dependent on that. What I mean by that is this. We could maybe before get away with having a religion or a way of life which was only ritualistic. What I mean by that is, yeah, somebody asks you what Islam is, and this is subhanAllah, even if you were to go ask the average Muslim and say, please tell me about Islam. They would say, well, it is, you know, believe there's one God and the Prophet Muhammad is the last messenger, and then you move on to the rest of the 5 pillars of Islam, which is prayer, fasting, hajj, zakat. And those, if you look at them on face value, they are simply rituals. Now, those rituals are an important aspect of Islam. However, when we make Islam only ritualistic, at that point we run into trouble. At that point we run into a problem, because now you tell your child, listen, you have to pray 5 times a day. Listen, you have to fast the month of Ramadan. The question that they're going to ask, or at least they're going to think it, is why? Like, why do I have to pray 5 times a day? Simply because that's your way of life? Simply because that's how you grew up? Simply because that's just what you do? Even Ramadan, something as sacred as the month of Ramadan, right? Whatever kind of Muslim you think you are, whatever the most practicing or not practicing Muslim, during the month of Ramadan, everyone falls into line, right? Like, everyone comes to the masjid, everyone prays Tarawih, and everyone fasts and so on and so forth. But even that, something which is so ingrained in Muslims, is being lost. Because we can no longer sustain something as just a ritual. And that's where there is a difference. We have to understand there is a difference between being religious and being a spiritual being. And I'll tell you the difference. Being religious can simply mean, you know what? You do all the rituals of Islam, right? You pray 5 times a day, you stay away from these sins and those sins and so on and so forth. You fast and you give charity and all that stuff. And I would call that person a religious person, because if you look at them from the outside, they are religious, they're practicing Islam. A spiritual person, or a spiritual Muslim on the other hand, a mu'min, is a person who not only practices the rituals of Islam, but also those rituals penetrate the heart of this person. So when a person prays, they know why they're praying. When they fast, they know why they're fasting. Their heart is involved in this act of worship. And that is why if you go back to the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, you find a heavy emphasis on that morsel of flesh, being the heart. Because if you take the heart out of the rituals, if you take our spirituality out of the rituals, you can only sustain it for so long. You can only do it for so long until it just becomes tiresome for you. And that is why the Prophet said, أَلَا إِنَّ فِي الْجَسَدِ مُضْغَةً إِذَا صَلَحَتْ صَلَحَ الْجَسَدُ كُلُّهُ. He says, certainly in the body there is a morsel, meaning a piece of flesh. If it is sound, meaning if it's doing well, then the rest of the body will do well also. وَإِذَا فَسَدَتْ فَسَدَ الْجَسَدُ كُلُّهُ. If it is ruined, if it becomes corrupted, if it gets messed up, then the rest of the body will be messed up as well. He said, أَلَا وَهِيَ الْقَلْبُ. Most certainly that is the heart. And what the Prophet ﷺ is telling us here is that take care of your heart, because that is where everything else stems from. If our heart is rectified, if our heart is doing okay, if we have purified our heart, if our heart has submitted to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then technically everything else should follow. And that is why a person who prays, understanding why they pray, and their heart is involved in that prayer, and even if they find their heart lacking in that prayer, they're struggling with getting their heart involved, that person's prayer is very different than a person who simply prays because, you know what, that's just what you do because you're a Muslim. You know, Imam Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he gave this beautiful example. He said two people can be praying the exact same prayer. So from the outside, it looks exactly the same. For example, two people get up to pray Fajr. 2 rak'ahs. They both say Allahu Akbar, they raise their hands, and they tie their hands, they recite Surah Al-Fatiha. And let's say they even recite the same surah afterwards. And then they make ruku' and they get up from ruku'. And so, from the actions, it's exactly the same. But Imam Ibn al-Qayyim rahimahullah ta'ala, he says, however, the difference in their reward, yani what they get out of this prayer, can be like the difference between the heavens and the earth. Now what's missing here? What causes this difference? Well, what causes this difference is the involvement or the role that the heart plays in this prayer. And that is why I think, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, that one of the solutions to this problem that we're having is to go back to the spirituality of the Prophet ﷺ and the companions of the Prophet ﷺ. Because Islam wasn't practiced ritualistically. It was practiced as rituals that had true meaning for Muslims. And that is why the Prophet ﷺ, for the first 13 years of Islam, none of the quote-unquote rituals were obligated. The prayer wasn't obligated. Fasting wasn't obligated. Hajj and Umrah weren't obligated. As a matter of fact, even Zakah wasn't obligated. It was 13 years after the Prophet ﷺ received the message of Islam that these things started to become obligated. They became law in Medina. Why? Because for 13 years, the Prophet ﷺ was teaching the people to increase in their iman. The Prophet was teaching the people to tie their hearts to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is why if you look at the Quran, and if you look at the Meccan ayat, the Meccan verses, versus the Madani verses, the Madani ayat, you'll find many thematic differences. One of the thematic differences that you find that the Madani, the ayat that were revealed in Medina, 13 years after the Meccan phase, you will find laws mentioned there. You will find rulings, you will find instructions mentioned in those ayat. However, in the Meccan ayat, you don't find any of that. You don't find anything telling us of how to make wudu, how to pray, and so on and so forth. Those ayat deal with strengthening a person's iman. They deal with an afterlife. They deal with heaven and hell. They deal with iman. They deal with you as a person and goodness in general. The reason for that is that a person who spends the time to work on their spirituality, their connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that the rest of the stuff will follow. And so my advice, subhanAllah, to a lot of parents and even those people who are struggling with their Islam is it's important to build your spirituality. It is important to teach your kids spirituality along with the rituals. I'm not telling you don't tell your kids to pray. And it's not important whether your kids pray 5 times a day. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that as you teach them the salah, teach them what the salah means to them. Right? And this is not a talk on the salah, but the salah should be studied as well. So the topic we have for today, the topic of sabr, the topic of patience, this is something which is a topic of the heart. It's a topic of spirituality. Because patience, yes, it is manifest, it is shown on our limbs, right? For example, how a person behaves when they're tested and so on and so forth. You can see it. But where it originates, where it lies, where it stems out from is the heart. And that is why no one else can make us a patient person. No one else can force us to be patient. No one else can do that for us. Patience, if we're trying to be more patient, then it starts with ourselves. Because you know what? Other people don't have access to our hearts. No one has access. No one except you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has access to your heart. And so, who can change what is happening inside of you, what is happening in your heart? It's only you. And that is important to understand when we're talking about topics like patience. Because if we think that it's simply going to be a ritualistic action that changes us and makes us more patient to deal with the tests and trials, then it's not going to work like that. It has to be something which is internal, and that's why there's a very strong spiritual aspect to patience that I'm going to talk about in a little bit, inshallah ta'ala. You know, a man came to Imam al-Shafi'i, rahimahullah ta'ala, and he said, I have a question for you. He said, who is better? Which person is better? A person who never goes through any tests and trials, like they don't go through any hardship, but even though they haven't gone through any tests and trials, they recognize the ease that Allah has given to them. And they are thankful for that. They make shukr. They thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Is this person better, or a person who goes through difficulties, a person who goes through tests and trials, but they remain patient upon those tests and trials? Who is better? Imam al-Shafi'i, he says, certainly the person who is put through tests and trials is better. Now my question for you, and you can raise your hand and answer this question, inshallah ta'ala, is why? Why did Imam Shafi'i say that a person who is tested and tried, and then they remain patient, is better, is higher in rank than the person who goes through ease but they thank Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? You know the answer? Just raise your hand, inshallah. Yeah.
Because when you're put through trials, it's easy to lose hope and become depressed and kind of just give up. But if you can remain steadfast and have faith that Allah subhanahu will get you through it, then that gives you a higher rank, I guess. Okay, so you're saying that going through tests and trials requires more of an effort to be patient. I wouldn't necessarily agree. Because for some people, being thankful in times of ease is much harder than being patient in times of difficulty. And actually, the Sahaba, they would actually say that we don't fear for ourselves the fitan, the tests and trials, because that is a test that we can see. But the test of ease is what we fear, because sometimes you don't realize you're in a state of ease and it's easy to keep coasting. Right? So by that argument, I could actually argue the opposite. Anyone else? Anyone else? Yeah.
Patience is the only characteristic that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves, he said. Well, one of the only people.
Not necessarily, no. Anyone else? I'll give one more chance, inshallah, and then I'll answer this for you. Yeah, go ahead.
The sabr requires the heart controlling the heart. Whereas the salah, thankful to Allah, is like the movement of the body.
Well, look, even thankfulness is something which is internal and that is expressed on our limbs. So in that sense, shukr and sabr, being thankful and being patient, are on equal level. Alright? I'm going to go ahead and answer this question for you. Imam al-Shafi'i, actually not me, Imam al-Shafi'i will answer this question for you. What he said is that, certainly, he said, the person who is patient when they're tested and tried is better, because that was the rank of the prophets. Right? The prophets, every single prophet was tested and tried. And it is through those tests and trials and remaining patient over those tests and trials that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala raised the ranks. Number one, the scholars say, tarku shakwa, to leave off complaining to other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? Number one, to leave off complaining. Number two, sidq al-rida, to be truthful, sincere in being content. And lastly, qabul al-qada, to accept the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This is the formula for patience. So if you want to ask yourself and say, am I a patient person? This is one of the ways you can test yourself and say, listen, when something happens to me, when I go through something, do I leave off complaining? Do I leave off reacting in a way which is negative? Am I accepting of the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Am I okay with it? Have I sincerely accepted this? That is our definition of patience. And you know what the scholars say about patience? They say patience, the ruling of patience is that patience is wajib. And why do they say that? They say that because they say, look, if you look at the Quran, and if you look at how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us to be patient, it's always in the command, it's always in the form of a command. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us to be patient. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu isbiru. those of you who believe, be patient. Even in the sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, you find the Prophet ﷺ often says to someone, isbir, or isbiri, have patience. And this is a command. And now, one of the questions that comes up is, why would Allah command us, why would Allah make patience wajib upon us? And the answer to that is Allah makes patience wajib upon us because we cannot survive, we cannot attain Jannah without being patient. If we aren't patient people, if we don't have that characteristic of being patient, then Jannah will not be attained. And I know sometimes, subhanAllah, people think about patience, and we kind of convince ourselves that we're good to go. Right? I often say, and I say this a lot, some people are delusional about their patience. Right? If you're to ask somebody, are you a patient person? And they'll say, yeah, I think I'm pretty patient. Right? And the Prophet actually tells us how you can, once again, how do you know if you're patient or not? The famous story, many of you probably heard the story, of the woman who's crying at the grave of her child. Right? There's a woman, her young child has passed away. She's standing at his grave and she's crying and she's wailing. The Prophet ﷺ walks by and he says to her, Isbiri wahtasibi. He says, have patience and gain the reward of Allah. Right? And you know what she says to the Prophet ﷺ? She says, إِنَّكَ لَمْ تُصِبْ بِمُصِيبَتِي. She says, you have never gone through what I'm going through. You have never been afflicted with this type of calamity. And you know what? I know sometimes people who look at this hadith, look at this narration, people often look down at this woman. Right? They're like, oh, how ridiculous is this? Right? Like, how ridiculous is this person telling the Prophet ﷺ, what do you know of my pain? But you really have to look at what she's going through here. You know, they say that one of the most difficult, one of the most painful tests that a human being can go through is the loss of a child. Right? And for those parents in the house, those of you who have children, you understand this. And I know maybe the younger generation, those of you who aren't married, don't have children, you're not going to get this until you have children. Right? I recently had a child, actually not recently anymore, it's been about a year and a half now. And this incident that occurred with the Prophet ﷺ was never as real for me as it is now. Like, it was never before, was it ever as real for me as it is now? Because I look at my child, and I look at how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put this type of love that I have for my child, and I often say about my child, may Allah protect him, protect all of our children, that I didn't even know I was capable of loving someone to this capacity. Right? Like those young people who like fall in love or whatever, like crazy love. You're like, oh my God, I'm in love and this is amazing or whatever. Like I'm so, y'all don't know love. Right? When you have a child and you look at this little innocent being who's reliant upon you for everything, right? And the smallest thing that hurts them like tears your heart apart, and your heart is filled with love, that is love that you can't describe. Like, and as I said, I didn't even know until I had my son, I didn't even know that I'm able to love to that degree. And don't get me wrong, I love my parents, I love my wife, I love my siblings, so on and so forth, right? These are some of the closest people in the world to me, but still, nothing compares to my child, right? And so when I listen to this incident, where this woman's child has died, and she's crying and she's wailing and she's losing control here, right? It's a serious test that she's going through. So in that moment, when she sees Rasulullah, and she didn't know it was him, right? She sees a man, a random person, come up to her and say, hey, be patient and hope for the reward. Her instinct is what? Like, what do you know of my pain? Like, until you've lost a child, right? Don't talk to me. But you know what? It was the Prophet ﷺ. And he had an immense character. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, إِنَّكَ لَعَلَى خُلُقٍ عَظِيمٍ. You're upon an immense and amazing character. So the Prophet ﷺ walks away. He doesn't say anything to her. And once again, and it's very important, subhanAllah, when we hear narrations and hadith and these type of things, it's very important to put yourself in the position of the people involved in the hadith. That'll change the dimension. That'll change how you look at these hadith. Right? So, the woman, I put myself in her position as a parent, like I get it, right? I see what she's going through. And then, not to say I'm anything close to the person, but putting myself in the position who is advising someone. right? I imagine, subhanAllah, me going to somebody in my community, right? And saying to them, somebody's wailing, let's say somebody's making a scene in the masjid, I don't know. Someone's like yelling and crying, and I go to them, and I'm like, listen, just be patient, like calm down, right? And the person says to me, like, what do you know of my pain? Like, who are you to say anything to me? And I think to myself, how would I react, right? Some part of me is gonna be like, hey, I just gave the khutbah. You don't know who I am. Like, I'm not just some, like, I'm telling you this for your own, but like, I would say something, I don't know, something. But the character of the Prophet, he says nothing. He walks away. Until someone goes to this woman and they say to her that, do you know who that was? That was the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And now she's like, she feels horrible. So she runs to the Prophet and she says, Ya Rasulullah, I didn't know it was you. Like, I didn't know you were the messenger of Allah. And you know what the Prophet says? He says, إِنَّمَا الصَّبْرُ عِنْدَ الصَّدْمَةِ الْأُولَى. He says patience, patience is at the onset of a calamity. Meaning when the calamity first strikes, when it first happens, that is the test of your patience. Not later, not an hour later, not a day later, not a week later. Because as I said, some people are straight up delusional about their patience. Right? Something happens, they flip out, and you like witness it, and then you talk to them a week later, and you're like, yeah, I remember this thing happened. They're like, yeah, I think I was pretty patient. And you're like, no, you weren't. Right? You flipped out, you made a scene, you started yelling. And subhanAllah, talking about parents and kids, sometimes parents don't realize this. Right? A parent will flip out on their child. Right? The child does something, they're like, what do you think? Whatever they say to their child, right? They flip out on their child, and then you ask them a week later, because the parent loves their child, right? And that anger is subsided, and they're in a different situation now. You ask them, they're like, no, I'm pretty patient with my children. Loving your children and being patient with your children are not the same thing. Right? Patience is something, is a matter of the heart that requires work. And we're going to talk about this word. But patience is something different than loving someone. You can be impatient with someone even if you do love them. Right? So this woman, she says, Prophet, I didn't know it was you. Prophet says, patience is at the onset of a calamity, not later. It's when the calamity first strikes. When somebody first cuts you off on the highway. Right? When the shayateen begin to whisper to you. When the shaitan begins to whisper to you. And you know these ayat that were recited by Sheikh, these ayat talk about this very issue. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that a good deed is not equal to a bad deed. Right? A good deed is not equal to a bad deed. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that idfa' billati hi ahsan. Repel evil with that which is better. Right? And then later on, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that if a whisper comes to you from the shaitan, فَاسْتَعِذْ بِاللَّهِ. Seek refuge in Allah from the shaitan, because what happens in that time, and these ayat are talking about, one of the things they're talking about is how we are in a position, and someone's coming at us with bad, with something evil, something not good. So someone yells at us, someone curses us, someone slanders us, someone backbites us. How do we reply to that? Because a good deed and a bad deed are not the same. If we repel evil with evil, then we have solved nothing. The idea is to repel evil with that which is ahsan, that which is better. But what happens in that time? Somebody comes and they yell at you, or whatever, they cut you off on the road, or whatever they did to annoy you or make you angry or mad. Right? The shayateen, they come and they whisper to you at that time. The shaitan comes and whispers, how dare this person do such and such? How dare this person say this? How dare this? And all those thoughts begin to flood our mind. And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us one of the remedies of that is to seek refuge in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala from the shaitan, from the shayateen. Right? Fight off those negative thoughts. Another issue when it comes to patience. Some people think that they're just not patient people. Like they have resigned to just not being a patient person. And that's why scholars pose this question, is patience something that is inborn or is it learned? Right? Psychologists often talk about issues of nature versus nurture, like our character and our behavior and how we react. And by the way, patience is what psychologists would call our reactionary self. There's different parts of our self. There's our emotional self and so on and so forth. This is what is known as your reactionary self, meaning how do you behave, how do you react when things happen around you. And a lot of times that is where patience comes into play. Right? It's when things happen to you or around you, something external is coming upon you, and your reaction is what defines your patience. Right? So some people, they will say, I'm just not a patient person. You know, as other people said, they're delusional about their patience. There's the other end to that spectrum as well. The person who says, I'm just not a patient person. And oftentimes this is the same person who says, you know what, I'm just hot-tempered. And subhanAllah, how is that an excuse? Do you think a person can show up on the day of judgment and they have talked bad about someone, they have yelled at someone, and as they're being questioned by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it'll be okay for them to say, this is just how I am? Right? This is the same person who commits sins and then blames it on the shaitan. It says the shaitan made me do it. Right? To take the responsibility away from ourselves. Actually, patience, yes, it can be. Part of it is within us, of course. But also very much it is something which is a learned trait. It is something that we have the power to change with the help of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet ﷺ said, Man yatasaddar yusabbirhu Allah. The person who seeks patience, Allah will make that person patient. So a lot of times we don't even try to be patient. We're just like, this is just not who I am. I'm just not capable of doing such and such. Right? This is just who I am. When as a matter of fact, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands us in the Quran to be patient. Right? Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu ista'inu bis-sabri was-salah. Those of you who believe, seek help in patience and prayer. This is a command for you to seek help, to use patience. Right? It doesn't mean that just, you know, if you're a patient person, then be patient. If you're not, then don't worry about it. What this is saying is push yourself, train yourself, work on yourself to be patient. And then the Prophet tells us that a person who seeks patience, a person who tries to be patient, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give this person patience. Patience, the scholars say, can be divided into three categories. Three categories where patience is needed. Number one, when it comes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, number one, to be patient upon or to be patient in the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning what? Every single act of obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala requires some type of patience. Any type of goodness requires some type of patience. And we see this in every single act of worship. There's not a single act of worship except that it requires some type of patience. Our prayer requires patience. You know, one of the tricks of the shaitan is to convince people that either you are a person who can pray properly, who can pray with khushu', is good with their prayer, they pray on time, or you're not. It's like your spirituality is an on and off switch, and that's not how spirituality works. We have to struggle with our prayer. Every prayer has to be a struggle. That is the point of the prayer. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't expect our prayers to be perfect. But what Allah wants from us is that we try with every single prayer. And that is what is known as khushu'. Sometimes people think khushu' is that you are focused and concentrating in your prayer. That's not what khushu' is. Because you know what? Khushu' is a requirement in the prayer. And if that was the case, then none of our prayers would be valid. Because how many of us can say that we are focused in our prayer 100% of the time? I don't know about y'all, but I can't say that. I can't say that every single one of my prayers I'm 100% focused. I'm thinking about the ayat. I'm spiritually involved. My heart is involved. I'm humbly submissive in every single prayer, every single moment of my prayer. No, I can't say that about myself. So if that is what khushu' is, and khushu' is a requirement of our prayer, then none of our prayers would be accepted. And that is why khushu' is not that you have a perfect prayer. Khushu' is that you are constantly struggling with your prayer. That every time your mind begins to wander, every time your heart begins to wander, every time you start having outside thoughts, that you bring yourself back. And that is what the Prophet taught us of some of the ways to deal with it. For example, the Prophet said if you start having outside thoughts, to say, to seek refuge in Allah from the shaitan. Right? What is the purpose of that? To bring yourself back, and that is what khushu' is. And that is what is required. That when we start to falter, when we start to have issues in our prayer, we bring ourselves back. And that is something that we are capable of. So our prayer, fasting, that's very obvious. And that's why the scholars call Ramadan the month of patience. Right? Because what is Ramadan? What is fasting other than being patient over the things that you desire? Right? Not only things that you desire, things that are basic necessities for us. Food and drink. And that's a basic necessity for us. So that month, that Ramadan, that fasting is training ourselves to be patient. If you look at Hajj or even Umrah, how many people here have made Hajj? Raise your hand. Did anyone go this year and is already back? Anyone? Okay. Guess not back yet. Hajj, if you've ever made Hajj, you know, and I often tell this to people. I say, listen, if you wanna go and have like a nice, like easy, relaxed time, you wanna have like this nice, relaxed spiritual journey, then go make Umrah. Even though Umrah is getting difficult now as well, right? But go for Umrah in the off season. There's not a lot of people. You can go in and pray pray a relaxed prayer and this and that. When you go make tawaf, there won't be a lot of people. It's all nice and easy, and it's very comfortable. But Hajj, on the other hand, is probably one of the most difficult things that you're going to go through. Hajj is one of the biggest tests of your patience that you will probably go through. And sometimes people don't realize that. And they think that, sometimes when I was in Medina, people would come for Hajj, and one of the things that people would complain about is, how am I supposed to be spiritual when there's 1,000 people around me, right? Some people are like reciting out loud. Some people got some serious BO, right? I can't concentrate. Someone's like nudging me. Someone's pulling me. Like, how am I supposed to be spiritual in this time? Well, in that time, our spirituality comes from dealing with all of those difficulties and still seeking forgiveness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, still trying to attain Jannah. That is what Hajj is supposed to teach you. That is what you're supposed to go through when you go for Hajj. It's not that every single tawaf that you make, every single prayer that you pray is going to be like this amazing spiritual experience where you just feel, and that's not realistic. Yeah, you're going to have moments like that in Hajj. Right? You're going to have moments where you do feel that spirituality, of course. But a lot of that Hajj is a test and a trial. And likewise, zakah and all of our acts of worship require patience. So in order for us to fulfill our, to be obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we must be patient. We cannot move forward, we cannot live our life as Muslims unless we are patient. That's number one. Number two, second category of patience is the patience that is needed, that is required to stay away from sins. To stay away from the disobedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And once again, the shaitan plays the same trick. He will either convince you that you're either a sinful person or you're not. And sometimes people start comparing ourselves to others, and sometimes, as we said, when we look at others, everyone else's life looks perfect, everyone else looks like a perfect Muslim, and we're like, I'm the only one who has a problem. And as a matter of fact, everyone struggles. Everyone has desires. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created us to have desires. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has instructed us to stay away from our impermissible desires, the things that we desire. So every moment that a person, and this is why the scholars kind of mention this amazing point, that a person who stays away from a sin, while conscious of that, they're continually being rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? For example, somebody desires, let's do like a very simple example, somebody desires, smoking, right? They enjoy smoking cigarettes, which we know obviously is haram, it's not a difference of opinion, right? Someone enjoys smoking cigarettes, right? But they decided, I'm going to quit or whatever, and they go a whole day without smoking. Now, if they're conscious of the fact, if the intention that they've made is that I'm doing this for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm doing this because, it's bad for my health and it can kill me and cause cancer and all that kind of stuff, that's fine and great, and that's an added benefit. But it is also displeasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so if that is their intention, then every moment that they're not smoking a cigarette, they're being rewarded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Every moment that we leave something that is attractive to us, that we find something from our desires, every moment we are rewarded for every single one of those moments. Number three, and this is a big one, being patient upon difficulty or hardships. And some scholars call this being patient upon the qadr, the decree of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Meaning when things happen around you that are outside of your control. This can be a calamity that befalls you on a personal level. This could be a physical difficulty. This could be a situation that you're in. This could be something as simple as someone slandering you, someone spreading lies about you, right? Someone backbiting you. This is not in your control. Right? As much as we think sometimes we have control over people and we can stop people from talking about us, that's not the reality of life. Right? So a person who is patient with these difficulties that come upon them, that requires patience. And you know, subhanAllah, within these three categories, the scholars ask the question, which is the highest rank? You know what they say the highest rank is? 1 and 2. Meaning to be patient being patient with the obedience of Allah and being patient to stay away from sins is actually a higher rank than being patient upon difficulty. Because you know why? Because difficulties we don't have control over. Something bad happens to us, we don't have control over that. But when you have to be in the obedience of Allah, when you have to stay away from a sin, that is something that you control in that moment. You have to make that decision. You have to choose to be patient or not. And that's why that is a higher rank, even though all three of these are required from us. I know I'm running out of time. I just got the 5-minute note. But what I wanted to give to you, inshallah ta'ala, before we end, is how to increase in our patience. And as I said earlier, patience is not something that you either have it or not. Right? It's not all or nothing. Patience is something as actually scholars would call wazifatul amal. Right? It's something it's a job that you have to do for the rest of your life. Right? Every single day, every single moment can be a moment that requires patience from us. Right? So what are some things that we can do to require patience? Those of you who are taking notes, I think there's like 2 people in the room. I'm going to number these for you. Okay? Number 1, seek patience in your spirituality. Right? As I started with, there's a very strong connection between patience and the other matters of our heart as well, and our spirituality. Without spirituality, without our connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's going to be very difficult to be patient. And I'll give you an example of that. You all know the famous companion of the Prophet Ibn Abbas, right? Y'all know him? Yeah? Okay. Radiallahu anhu. Now, he was known to be one of the knowledgeable companions, meaning he was considered a scholar of the religion as well. Ibn Abbas, radiallahu anhu. He was out on a journey one day. He was out away from home, and a messenger comes to him and gives him the news that his son has passed away. Right? Now once again, imagine how that would feel. May Allah protect us, protect all of our children. But imagine how that would feel. You're far away from home, and you get the news that your child has passed away. Right? Ibn Abbas, he says, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. To Allah we belong, and to Him we will return. Then he turns around and he prays 2 rak'ahs of prayer. And he starts praying immediately. And the people around Ibn Abbas, they're like, what's going on? Like we didn't say anything else. They didn't even really see what his emotional reaction was. He didn't sit down, he didn't break down, like none of that kind of stuff. They're like, he said, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un, and then he went and prayed, he started praying. He turned around immediately. Right? And there's nothing in between those 2 moments. Him making the statement and him praying. It's like he said it and he turned around and he prayed immediately. And after he finishes praying, the people around him, they say to him, why did you do that? Like, how did you not have any other reaction? And he says, haven't you heard Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala say, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, ista'inu bis-sabri was-salah. Those of you who believe, seek help in patience and prayer. Inna Allah ma'as-sabirin. Allah is with those who are patient. Right. So Ibn Abbas, he knows that in that moment, the only thing that will really help him, that will truly bring some type of relief, some type of comfort, is his spirituality, his connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He can get upset, he can cry. Not saying anything wrong with crying, right? Normal human reaction, it's fine. He can do it. He can sit down. He can break down. He can start talking to his friends. He can get sad. And he can do that, or he can turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when describing the people who are the people who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives success to, the people who are guided by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala,
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us that these are people who, when they are struck with a calamity, إِذَا أَصَابَتْهُمْ مُصِيبَةٌ, what do they say? قَالُوا إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. That when they're struck with a calamity, when a hardship, when something bad, when a difficulty comes upon them, they say, إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. That we belong to Allah, and to Allah we will return. Right? This is the statement of those people. Right? And that is what Ibn Abbas was doing right here. Right? That he says, and that statement, إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ, is actually very interesting, subhanAllah. Because I know culturally a lot of times we make this statement only when someone dies. Right? And there's nothing wrong with that, and that is correct. We should say that when someone dies, but it's not restricted to that. It is supposed to be for any calamity. Anything that we find to be a challenge, anything that we find to be a hardship upon us, we say, إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ. And that ties into our spirituality. And that ties into, I would say, like 1B. The second way is to think about and to internalize the reality of this life. What is the reality of this life? The reality of this life, I'll mention 2 realities, is that first of all, this life is temporary. Right? Just like our own life will perish, likewise the things around us will perish. Whatever difficulty we have is temporary as well. Whatever hardship we're going through is temporary. Right? And that's why that statement, إِنَّا لِلَّهِ وَإِنَّا إِلَيْهِ رَاجِعُونَ, is so important. Because we're reminding ourselves that we're not here forever. We're only here for a short period of time. We belong to Allah, and we will return to Allah, like everyone else. Right? So this life is temporary. It's not going to last. And as I said, likewise, our difficulty, our pain, our hardship will not last as well. Even if our pain and our difficulty lasts our whole life, what is this life compared to the akhirah? Nothing. It's a blink of an eye. Right? That is the spirituality that we seek that is the spirituality that we need to be patient in times of difficulty. And that's why Ali radiallahu ta'ala, he said that patience, if you compare it to iman, its comparison is like the head to the rest of the body. He said, if a head is severed from a body, the body will not live, it will not survive. Likewise, our iman cannot survive without being patient. And they're interdependent, right? They're codependent. They need each other. In order to be patient, we need iman. And in order for our iman to flourish, we need patience as well. So that's the first thing. Patience, seek your patience in your spirituality, in your connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Number 2, seek your patience from the people around you. It is important to surround yourself. It is important that we surround ourselves with people who are positive in their patience. It is important to surround ourselves with people who will help us be patient. And this is why in Surah Al-Asr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, وَتَوَاصَوْا بِالصَّبْرِ, those who enjoin patience upon one another, because for the most part, it's very difficult to do it alone, if not impossible. To deal with difficulties, to deal with trials on your own is very difficult. Not to say it can't be done. Right? Yaqub alayhi salam did it on his own for some time. And he went to the higher level, which is seeking his patience with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He said, إِنَّمَا أَشْكُو بَثِّي وَحُزْنِي إِلَى اللَّهِ. So Yaqub alayhi salam, when he lost his 2 sons, Yusuf alayhi salam, what did he say? He said, I only complain to Allah with my grief and my sorrow. Right? So that's the higher level. But the next level is we need the right people around us. Right? It is important to surround yourself with people who will help you be patient, and we must be those people who help others be patient as well. Right? And this is why we know that isolation is one of the tricks of the shaitan as well. That when we begin to isolate ourselves from the right type of people, from people who can help us, that is when the shaitan can attack. But Rasul said, إِنَّ الشَّيْطَانَ مَعَ الْوَاحِدِ. Shaitan is with the person who is by themselves. وَهُوَ مِنَ الْإِثْنَيْنِ. And he is less so with those who, like 2 people. Right? So as we increase in the jama'ah, as we increase in the congregation, as we are there to help and support one another, we are able to defeat the shaitan. And that is why having a community, that is why being attached to the masjid is so very, 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 very important. And I know you'll hear people say, our masajid are messed up today. right? We're dealing with a lot of issues. Nobody cares about the youth. Nobody cares about women in the masajid and all that. Now, you know what? All of these are valid criticisms of the masjids. Right? Not to say all masajid are like this, but there are a lot of masajid that are not catering to certain groups of people. Right? Those are valid criticisms. But the answer is not to leave the masjid. The answer is to rectify the masjid, is to make positive changes. If you feel like the masjid has failed you, then you be the catalyst for change. Right? And I know this may seem a little bit controversial, but I'm going to say it anyway. There's nothing wrong with building more masjids. Right? As a matter of fact, and by the way, this doesn't apply to this masjid at all. Right? There's nothing personal with this masjid, so please don't take it in that way. But if a person is in a place where the masjid you find is not, for example, a masjid that doesn't cater to women, right? Prophet said, do not stop women from coming to the masjid. This is a command, right? There are masjids out there that don't even have a place for women to pray, right? If you're in a place like that, it's important to, if you've tried and the masjid cannot be rectified and nothing can be done, it's important to build a masjid that is worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala properly. Build a masjid that is upon the sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Man bana lillahi masjida, bana Allahu lahu baytan fil jannah. A person who builds a masjid for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah will build for them a place in paradise. And yes, this applies to helping out the current masjid as well, of course. But we cannot simply be complainers. A lot of times I feel like our generation is just a complaining generation. Alright? Anytime anything gets posted on Facebook, go look at the comments, there's a lot of people complaining. And it's usually people who are complaining that are themselves doing very little. Right? People are willing to criticize everything that's happening out there, but if you were to turn around and say, well, what are you doing? Right? You don't like the way that these people are doing whatever. Right? You don't like their message, you don't like their organization, you don't like their activities, you don't like their events. Okay, we heard you. But what are you doing? Are you trying, have you put in any type of work? And that's why, the older generations, the generation before my generation, like my parents and stuff, sometimes I think we're too critical of them. Not to say, the messages that they established, not to say that they're perfect. Yeah, they have issues, they have a lot of issues. But you know what? It's easy to sit back and point the finger and say, you guys didn't do this, and you didn't do this, and you made a message like this, and there's this problem and that problem. It's easy to criticize, right? Everyone's a critic. And it's, on the other hand, to do something, to build something, to establish something, to be proactive is something which is difficult. But that is what is needed. We need to be that catalyst for that change. And that, as I said, this goes back to helping one another. Being there for one another. We have to be part of this community of Muslims. Right? That is something which is characteristic of our ummah. Have you ever heard the phrase, Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah? Right? This is one of the ways we define ourselves, meaning Ahlus Sunnah, meaning we are the people of the Sunnah, right? Meaning we adhere to the Sunnah of the Prophet. So I said, listen, you can interpret Islam whatever way you want. You can take whoever's interpretation you want, but for me, as a Sunni Muslim, as someone who belongs to Ahlul Sunnah, I want to be from the people of the Sunnah. I want to interpret Islam in the way the Prophet interpreted it, the way he taught it to his companions, to the best of my ability. Are we still going to have differences? Of course. But in the end of the day, can we at least agree that we go back to the Sunnah of the Prophet? Yes. That's a requirement. Wal Jama'ah, and congregation. Meaning what? We come together. But what do we come together on? What are we uniting upon? We are uniting upon the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And this is why the Prophet said, Alaykum bil Jama'ah. He said, I urge you to stick to the Jama'ah, to stick to the congregation. This is not some one group out there, which is like some special group. This is the congregation of Muslims that you have around you. We are all imperfect. We all have issues. But it's important that we come together to help one another, because we can't survive. We cannot survive here or anywhere else in the world with the tests and trials that Muslims are going through today, whether it be Islamophobia or this or that, or the rise of atheism and our kids, falling away from Islam, whether it be people losing their spirituality, whether it be all these issues that people are going through. Unless we come together as a congregation and help one another, we're not going to be able to survive. And I know my time's up. I just want to share one one ayah with you, inshallah ta'ala, before I leave. This is a very, very important ayah. This is your definition or your strategy for success in this life and the next. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu, isbiru wa sabiru wa rabitu. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, those of you who believe, have patience. Right? Once again, a command to have patience. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, wa sabiru. And be more patient. Be more patient than what? Be more patient than whatever you're going through. Whatever struggle, whatever problem, whatever difficulty, whatever trial you're going through, make sure your patience is just a little bit higher than that. You're a little bit stronger than the problem that you're going through. وَرَابِطُ. You know what rabt means in Arabic? It means to tie, to bind, to cling, to come together. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala here is commanding the Muslims, commanding the believers. Yes, have patience and exceed in your patience. Make sure your patience is stronger than what you're going through, but also hunker down. Come together, because you're in for the long haul. Right? Rabt here is two things. Number one, us as a congregation, us as Muslims coming together, helping one another, but also, patience is not just tonight, it's not just tomorrow, it's not just hopefully a week from now, hopefully if you think back at this talk, it's not just then, it's even 20 years from now. When you've long forgotten about me, or this talk, or this lecture, or tonight, when you're going through some trial and some difficulty, and things are raining down upon you, and you feel like you cannot make it, that is when you need patience. It's the long haul. This, my brothers and sisters, is the strategy for success. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, لَعَلَّكُمْ تُفْلِحُونَ, so that perhaps you may be successful. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us patience. I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us beautiful patience. There's actually a lot more that I wanted to talk about when it comes to patience, but maybe we can cover some of it in the Q&A. جزاكم الله خيرا. الله تعالى أعلم. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك. أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. وجزاكم الله خيرا. والسلام عليكم.
Sheikh Saad Tasleem. So really quick, before the Q&A, I want to call up Brother Albab Ali, Hafiz Albab Ali actually. He'll be talking very shortly about the Darul programs.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Jazakallah Sheikh Saad for that beautiful talk. I just want to highlight a couple of things he mentioned in the beginning, which was how, mashallah, we have such a big youth presence here today. And it's important that, the youth are assimilated amongst better crowds so that they can practice this patience. And alhamdulillah, Darul has many of these youth programs that you can put your children in, and they'll be in these environments where, instead of focusing on the rituals, you focus more on the spiritual aspect, as Sheikh Saad mentioned in the beginning. Both, yes, correct. Darul Juniors. So alhamdulillah, we have a youth program here, ages 7 to 13 for both boys and girls. The boys, they meet every Friday. They just started a couple weeks ago, led by Sheikh Walid. They meet every Friday, 6:30 p.m. That's for boys ages 7 to 13. The girls, the also junior girls, they meet every other Friday, and it's led by Sister Seema Ryan. You can contact her for more details as well. This is for, again, boys and girls ages 7 to 13. Now, for the older crowd, from 14 and above, college, high school age, and a little younger, we have YM, Young Muslims Organization, national organization. I'm sure you guys have been many programs here. You're familiar with them. YM Sisters, they meet every Friday throughout the school year at 7 p.m. And YM Brothers are throughout the year, 7:30 p.m. here at Darul. Both of them. These are, again, ages 14 and up, high school, college age. And these are great programs to put your kids in to practice what Sheikh Saad was saying in the beginning. And finally, one last thing I wanted to mention was we recently started, or we will be starting, evening class with Sheikh Walid for the boys and girls. The girls side will be with his wife, Sister Hidayah. The evening class will be 5 to 7, Mondays to Thursdays. If you're interested in registering, you can contact the Darul administration, the website, or contact someone. And actually, one thing I left out, sisters also have a halaqah every Friday, led by Sheikh Walid's wife, after Asr every Friday. That's something that also recently started, so please take advantage of that as well. And lastly, 2 announcements. This next Friday is Six Flags, Great Adventure Muslim Day. You can purchase tickets here. Mazhar Uncle has those tickets. Again, this is next Friday, all day. Six Flags is booked for us, inshallah. Please take your friends and families there. And finally, very important fundraiser, Zaytuna is fundraising here at the Marriott next Saturday. You can look online for more details on that Facebook event, on that event. But again, this is next Saturday at the Marriott, fundraiser from Zaytuna Institute. Jazakallah khair, assalamu alaikum.
Jazakallah khair, Allah Ali. So we'll just jump right into the Q&A session. Just a little side note, Isha Salah I know has been delayed to 9 o'clock, but we're actually going to delay it for another 5 minutes. So inshallah we'll pray Isha at 9:05 today. So let's just jump right into the question and answers. So the first question goes for Sheikh Saad Tasleem is, sometimes in the middle of the night I wake up scared, fearing Allah, and I feel like I am dying. I feel like I'm going to hell. I get these especially on days that I miss my prayers. I'm aware that these are signs of anxiety. Would this fear and anxiety be considered a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala?
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, so look, this can be considered a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if it leads to positive change, right? So if a person, because of that type of feeling, they make positive changes and they get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we say yes. However, if it leads to anxiety, if it leads to a person losing hope, if it leads to them feeling hopeless, as this person said, I feel like I'm just going to go to hell or whatever, then it's not. And actually we would say that is actually, it could be a feeling from the shaitan. Because one of the goals of the shaitan, actually his major goal when it comes to mankind, is like his number one on his priority list, is to get mankind to lose hope. Right? Actually, even the name of shaitan, Iblis, in Arabic, Iblis comes from the word iblas, or the verb ablasa, which means to lose hope. Right? Shaitan, this is what he tries to bring out in mankind, get them to lose hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it is at that point that the shaitan truly wins, because at that point we stop caring, we stop trying. So if a person says, listen, I'm just a bad person, I'm going to hell, I can't be saved, like that's it, right? Then we're going to stop trying because we lost hope. And that's when the shaitan wins. So if it leads to those type of feelings, right, then yes, it's a negative thing. And a person has those type of feelings, they should say, "A'udhu billahi minash shaitanir rajim," seek refuge in Allah from the shaitan. It is important, as we know, like in Islam, we try our best to have a balance between hope and fear, right? So in general, fear of the hellfire is not a bad thing, as long as it doesn't lead us to lose hope. Allah.
Alright, so the next question, I actually got two questions similar to this. You had mentioned in the beginning that, so if an individual does as you said and leave off complaining to none other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but then later on confide in someone else other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the situation that they went through, is that still a sign of patience? So if an individual does as you said and leave off complaining to none other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, does as you said and leave off complaining to none other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but then later on confide in someone else close to them regarding the situation that they went through, is that still a sign of patience?
Okay, complaining to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala or only complaining to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's a difference between complaining to people and seeking advice and counsel, right? So just complaining is actually counterproductive, and even now we know, people used to say back in the day that it's important to get things off of your chest, right? It's important to just just say things, or just get it off, or make you feel better. And now we know, subhanAllah, at least is what they're telling us now. Some psychologists, they say that simply complaining actually makes us feel worse. Right? So there's a difference between complaining and going to somebody for advice and counsel. Going to somebody for advice and counsel is a good thing. And actually it's a positive thing, and it's something that we as Muslims should be doing. The Prophet said, ad-din al-nasiha, that the religion is sincerity, and it's sincerity, seeking sincere advice, right? Counsel. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the Prophet, وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ, seek their counsel. Right? So yes, if we're going through a problem, if we're going through a difficulty, or for example, we need help in how to deal with it, right? We don't know what the proper way to deal with this issue is, then in that case, yeah, we should seek counsel, we should seek advice, especially one of the problems that happens, which I've seen, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best, is that sometimes people are going through problems and they may not realize, or they may not realize when the problems or the issues that they're, the emotional problems or the psychological issues that they're going through actually becomes an illness. So for example, somebody who's dealing with normal sadness is one thing, but when that sadness turns into like depression or clinical depression, then actually you have to go to other people for help, right? Because of that, when it becomes an illness, just like we go to a doctor for any other type of illness, likewise, if it's a psychological illness, we have to go to somebody who's qualified as well. So it's important to be able to distinguish between the two, and that's why it's important to talk to people of knowledge, people who can be helpful. And what we'll notice, in subhanAllah, that we may have people in our lives who we go to because they're just like our friend, right? Or they're just somebody we grew up with. And their advice may not be productive, it actually may be counterproductive, it may make our situation worse. It's important to go to people who are qualified in the issue that we're dealing with. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَاسْأَلُوا أَهْلَ الذِّكْرِ إِن كُنتُمْ لَا تَعْلَمُونَ. Ask the people of remembrance, people of knowledge if you don't know. Right? So this applies not only to issues of the deen, it applies to other issues as well. So it's important to go to the right people. Allah.
Jazakallah. So the next question is more actually advice. Any tips on how to speak about patients directly to young adults, both Muslims and non-Muslims, who are assimilating back into society?
First of all, one of the things that I don't like to do is that I don't like to give general blanket advice. Right? Like, how do we speak to these people, or how do you speak to those people, or how do you speak to somebody who commits this and whatever. After giving da'wah and counseling for coming up to 5 years now, which I know is not that long, one of the things that I've come to realize now is that we have to stop we have to stop painting people with this wide brush. Right? Even when it comes to issues of iman, whatever they're going through, everyone has their own circumstances. They have their own background. They have particular things that they're going through. So I can speak about patients in general, right? But when it comes to somebody's specific problems that they're going through in life, yeah, I'm gonna talk about patients in general, but also it's important to address the specific issues that they're going through. So two people, for example, can be going through the same trial, but the way they'll react to it could be different depending on who they are and their life experience and where they came from and their family background and so on and so forth. So I believe that type of advice should be given personally, privately and personally.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. And it'll be regarding the last point that you made, right? What is the best way to deal with situations where people are trying very hard to act and do things and make things happen, but people who run the masajids put up roadblocks and make things difficult to hold things such as events, classes, teaching, youth programs, etc. So,
do you have another question? No, because I'm going to answer this real quick. Once again, there's whoever asked this question, if you want to come to me and speak to me personally, that's fine. But I would need way more information to give the proper, or a lot of the best proper advice. There's so many factors that goes into something like this, and so I don't like answering questions like this.
All right, so I guess we have time for one more question. You had mentioned in the beginning that we need to work on our spirituality to be a mu'min. How do we do it, and what do we need to do to increase our spirituality?
Okay, if I had one piece of advice when it comes to our spirituality, it would be the importance of learning and implementation. Right? In order to be spiritual beings, we have to know what is the most effective type of spirituality. Right? So oftentimes we'll hear people talk about spirituality, and then they'll just leave it blank, or they'll leave it open to interpretation. In actuality, as Muslims, we believe that the best spirituality is the spirituality of the Prophet ﷺ. Right? He has been sent, he was sent to deliver the message of Islam to us. Right? So our path to spirituality is the path of the Prophet ﷺ. Right? So the more we know the path of the Prophet ﷺ, the more we understand how the Prophet ﷺ worshipped Allah, the more we understand his tariqah, or his way, right? The closer we will be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that comes with knowledge and implementation. And I add that caveat, implementation, because one of the other issues we're going through today is there's a plethora of knowledge, there's plenty of lectures and talks and YouTube videos and whatnot, but when it comes to actually implementing that stuff and making positive changes in our life with what we hear, that's another thing. Right? So it's important to learn our deen, have a proper understanding of our deen, and then implement that as well. Allah.
Jazakallah khair.